right, Kevin. So let's get into it a little bit. Let's just start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up in AI and how you moved from whatever it was you were doing 25 years ago in your career to where you are now.
Okay, so the reason I am where I am today is I spent almost 19 years at IBM, and I was in business partner technical support. And the great thing about that was you tended to change jobs every 2 years, and you move from product to product. So I was doing SPSS Modeler, doing analytics, and then SoftLayer and Bluemix showed up on the horizon. And first everybody moved to SoftLayer, and then everybody moved to Bluemix. And so when I left IBM, the last thing I was really doing was Bluemix administration, kind of care and feeding of the cloud. And that's what got me hired to my job after I decided after 2 months I was bored and really didn't like retirement. Um, and so I'm doing care and feeding in the cloud for a Watson implementation. And then it turned out I was also the only person on the maintenance team that knew JavaScript and Java and Node.js. So then I became the Watson expert as well.
So of that stuff that you did early on around analytics and around data, tell me how those disciplines, then we'll talk a little about the domain, but tell me how those disciplines prepared you for what you're seeing in AI today.
A lot of the preparation, especially in statistics, is learning to ask the right questions and learning to understand the data. And the one example that I always used to use as a generic example when I was teaching was baseball. And the reason I use baseball is because if you're using banking and you've got a room full of plumbers, they may or may not get it. If you use health insurance and you got a room full of bankers, they're going to be bored. Everybody kind of understands baseball, except for one presentation where there was an Indian master's student and he asked if I had ever done cricket. And I told him I was trying, but I couldn't find the data. And that was the other thing about baseball as a sample was there's an infinite amount of data out there. So it was very easy to build models and try to predict based on the statistics that go back to the late 1800s.
So you use the word model and you use the word statistics, and that's all structured data. And sort of that's the backdrop for where we are today with machine learning and with AI. Tell me about that transition from structured data in the enterprise to unstructured data and how you've seen that happen in your career.
So structured data, it's very predictable, and unstructured is very random. And the connection was for SPSS Modeler, it's like we've got all of this data and it's very predictable, and it goes back, what can we learn about it? And so the question that I had to answer was, what questions can I answer? And you end up with all sorts of random stuff. Like I looked one day and there was a very high percentage of leadoff batters that were center fielders, which I just thought was strange. And I told, I used to go watch the minor league team play here in Dallas. And I told the manager one night, and he said, well, duh, they're the fastest guy on the team. It's like, okay, so that A, proves the theory, but B, it explains it. And where you're going now is, okay, we're getting a lot of the same question. How do we explain it? And I think that's the challenge that we have today. Structured data, it's very easy to kind of look at the data set and figure out the kinds of things that can be derived from it. Unstructured data, it's kind of up to you. And for me, I think one of the advantages of doing technical support for as long as I did is you start to understand how people ask questions. Because when you're getting into AI, especially when you're getting into voice-driven applications, understanding the phrasing is what makes your application succeed or fail.
Got it. Got it. Helpful. Thank you. And from a domain perspective and what industry verticals you worked in, can you tell me sort of how that prepared you for where you're at now?
So I've always kind of been a generalist, and the first project that I worked on was actually to help field sales representatives ask questions about heavy equipment. At which point you have to learn a whole lot about heavy equipment in a very short period of time. The advantage that you have is, of course, from a developer standpoint, you have just slots in the questions. So you don't have to know day one that a 938C is a front loader. It helps, but you don't have to. But I think that's one of the challenges that we have is every team is going to need someone that understands how to ask the questions, but you also need someone that understands the lingo.
Got it. Got it. Huh. So so what areas are you working in today? Tell me about the kinds of customers you're working with today.
So right now I'm working on one project and we're doing health insurance, and it's basically a chatbot that will answer basic questions that either a patient or an agent will have. Things like, am I covered for a procedure? Or can you tell me how much my deductible is, or how much is left in my balances? So it's the trick, or the goal is to build self-service bots that can answer questions that today you would have an actual human agent answer.
So tell me how successful that's been and what we've been able to achieve in terms of having a bot mimic a person and their ability to give relevant and personalized information.
I think it's been relatively successful in that it's fairly easy to find the data. Again, the challenge has been making sure that the bot speaks like a human agent does. I think the biggest challenge that we have with bots in general is nuances. So there's implied things that people say, and a human will pick up on it. There may be missing data. Certainly, if you're calling about health insurance, pretty much every procedure in the universe has a code, and there is nobody that knows the code except people that are in the insurance business. So learning synonyms for what people may call things is very, very important.
So you say relatively successful, which is a shift from maybe where things were a few years ago. Give me what's changed over the last several years to allow us to deploy a solution like this in production. What's changed in AI? What are we doing differently, or how has the technology matured to make this doable?
I think processors are faster. I think with cloud, you have a lot easier scalability. And I think dictionary processing in general has gotten better. And people have learned to break up large data sets of structured data that's really only used for lookups into separate applications or even separate tables, so that you can pass off some of the conversation to a task that's specifically designed to translate what somebody's talking about. So in our current example, there's actually a system that's written that all it does is translate from generic medical terms to the code that will be used. So instead of having to, first of all, reinvent it every time you wrote an insurance app, but secondly, it gives you one place where all the updates have to be done. So any bot now that wants to learn anything about insurance can take a phrase that it doesn't understand, like TKR or total knee replacement, or I need a new knee, throw it over to an application that's specific just for translating that into the code, and then get the insurance code back, and then it can continue on.
And so for each domain, has there been development around expertise and language and dictionary for each domain, healthcare, petroleum, whatever?
I think there has been. And what's funny is that goes back to the early days of AI. That was what we're going to do. We're going to find the guy at the back of the warehouse who knows how everything works, and we're going to wring out his brain, and we're going to put it in a table so everybody will know exactly what he knows. And we're not there, but that was the lesson that I think people finally learned, is we need one big database that knows everything about a specific domain, and then we can generalize the rest of it.
Yeah. So thinking about where we are right now in the middle of the COVID crisis, what do you think is the applicability of this sort of automation technology around getting, as you just put it, all of that information and the correct information consistently? What do you think is the applicability of this kind of automation?
I think it's very, very applicable. I think I know we've got at least a couple of specific bots just for COVID-19 being built. And there's some that are already out on the internet for anybody to use. And it's the same process. So you've got a very defined domain, but the questions that people are going to ask are basically universal. It's, where do I go for help? How do I know if I've got it? What do I do if my wife has it? And all those questions will be asked all over the world, but you need a different regional set of answers, because telling somebody in New York where you go in Dallas for help isn't the answer.
So that mass personalization notion.
Absolutely. And it's got to be personalized, especially for something that's as global as a pandemic. It has to be regionalized.
Yeah, yeah. So talk to me a little about tool sets that are leading the way right now. Who are the teams or the manufacturers that are providing the tool sets that are best equipped for conversational AI at this point, for real world deployment?
So the ones that I'm most familiar with, IBM has Watson Assistant, which is actually where I started. And Amazon has Amazon Lex. And they're both very similar in that they help you to build questions, and the questions then trigger code on the back end. And the code is where things actually happen. That's where the magic is. And there's others as well. I think they're all fairly similar. And what they really are doing is parsing any input, and they're looking for three things: intents and entities and slots. An intent is what you're trying to do. So I would like a drink. You want a drink. So that's your intent. I would like a beer is the same kind of intent, although now you have a specific entity that you want to drink. And then if you wanted a slot, that would be a variable. So if a customer said, I want a drink, the next question, which would fill the slot, would be, what would you like? And they could say, I want tea, I want milk, I want soda, I want beer. So I think one of the interesting parts that came up when I was dealing with end users during the first rollout that I saw was everyone sort of assumed that if you had something like Assistant or Lex, it was just like having Siri. And what they didn't realize is you're responsible for building the database. So you can have an expert system about anything you want, as long as you have an expert to train it first. So that's been, I think, the biggest challenge. And the best way that I've seen to do that is you have to interview people that will be using the system about what questions they want to ask. And from there, you start breaking up into the intents and the entities that need to be captured. And then you can start building on the back end.
Yeah, it's funny to me that you use drinks as an example. That's it's one of the things I've always told people, right? There's 1,000 ways to order a drink, and we natively know what they are, but training the bot to know that I want a beer, I want a large beer, give me a cold one, pour me another one, hit me again, another round, that all of those things are synonymous with the same idea. So that's a great accessible example. I appreciate that. So talk to me about the future. Talk to me about what the future of automation looks like. Talk to me about where these tool sets will be deployed, and how far we've come.
I think we've come a long way. I think we're at a point now where it doesn't take a great amount of technical training to actually do the scripting on the front end. So to build intents and entities is usually, there's a GUI that's provided for each of the tools, and you can have the term I always hear is knowledge engineer. I don't know that that's a good term. To me, it's the guy that has to interface between the end users and the programmers or the people that are doing the implementation. They're the people that know how to speak the language of the target audience. And then as that gets easier, doing the back end will get, I think, a little bit more standardized, because it would be a lot simpler if the basic engine was always the same. It's very close. It's not there yet. But what we're looking at on the front end is all of these applications have the same thing in common. They're asking a question, and we're looking for intents and entities. And the back end is, we know what intents and entities we process, and we have to know where to go and get the data for them. So I would like to see the whole thing generalized, and I don't think we're there yet, but I have a feeling we will.
Yeah, that information architecture piece and the orchestration layer of understanding where, you have a human CSR and they understand what the source of information is, and they have to log into that system and retrieve that. I think that ends up being the biggest challenge from any implementation perspective, is how do we orchestrate, where does the bot get the data from, and how do we make sure that it's updated and easy to update and current, all those things. So that's an excellent point. And then give me specifically your perspective, call centers and places in the enterprise where you think this kind of tech would really thrive.
Call centers are always probably a good target, because if you can find a way to staff them with a bot instead of with people, I think, first of all, it will help lower your costs, which is always an important thing. But secondly, it gives you a level of consistency for your customer experience. And sometimes I think that's overlooked, because you have a lot of people where they're experts. They've been answering questions on the same product for years and years and years. They know it inside out. And the next time you call in, you get someone that just started and he's basically trying to stay one chapter of the manual ahead of you. If you have a bot, the bot knows what the bot knows, and everybody knows the same thing. I think having consistency would be a lot simpler. Also, you're looking at consistency across platforms. So if you call in and they're doing speech to text, you're going to the bot. If you use the website and they have a chat bot on the website, you're going to the same bot. So you can now support multiple platforms, and everybody will have the same experience and everybody will get the same answers.
Train once, engage many is the
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Really informative. Kevin, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you sharing the experience you've had thus far with Alderson. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. Talk to you later.